I mean, I love the pacing of this book because it's, I think necessarily it has to start off quite gently, where it being introduced. There's a lot of characters, right? So within this whole fleet, there were sort of 2,000 sailors. Am I right? It's around about that, but there was
Yes, nearly
100.
2,000.
Yeah, and so we're not meeting all 2,000 of them, but we're meeting a lot of them, and how people you sort of read the first part of the book and you think, why on earth did anyone become a sailor? But of course, many of them didn't have any choice in the matter, and were press ganged into it. But even before sort of anything, really, before any of the shipwreck, the conditions are so horrific, and so people are dying. People are getting scurvy, as you're saying. You're fantastic. I mean, I've never really had the symptoms of scurvy and the consequences of scurvy described as effectively as they are in this book. But if it was just about that, you'd go, this is a pretty amazing book. So it's sort of baffling to think of these men going away for months, and with this mission, more than 1 in 2 chance of not coming back. I mean, they obviously didn't necessarily think that, but they must have known there was a good chance they weren't going to come back.
Yeah, and the seeds of destruction in many ways were planted at the very outset. They were short of people, of volunteers, and I think when you talk about echoes of the present, the war in many ways was being engineered the way so many wars over history are, which is there's a great clamor to fight, but nobody wants to pay for it. And so they're short of men to get this. And so they round up, as you say, they press gang people to go. But they even went further. I mean, the Admiralty took the step of rounding up, now I don't even remember the number, 500, 600, I can't remember the exact number now, soldiers and seamen from a retirement home, many of whom were in their 60s and 70s, who were missing an assortment of limbs. I mean, some were, hopping, and some were so sick they had to be lifted on stretchers onto the ship. And so everybody knew that these people were going to be sailing to their death. I mean, they were in no condition to fight. And then, of course, they set off and they have this kind of great ambitions and hopes. And early on, they confront scurvy. And it was interesting, as you said about scurvy, too. I similarly didn't know, my impression of scurvy before I did this book was, oh, don't your gums kind of rot and turn black or something? And then I had these journals and logs that these men, and they were boys too. I mean, so there are people as young as 8 on these ships, and the cook on the Wager was 80, and and they were describing the scurvy, and I began to realize I really had no concept of what it was.
Yeah.
And it really is pernicious, and it would cause your hair to fall out, your teeth to fall out, even the cartilage that would glue together your bones would often seem to come undone. There was one seaman on the ship who had fractured a bone like 4 decades, I don't even remember now how long ago, earlier. And of course, that fracture had long since healed. And suddenly he has scurvy. And so the bone weakens and it fractures in the very same place.
Wow.
And the other thing I didn't know about scurvy was it would affect your senses. One seaman said the disease got into our brains and we went raving mad. And of course, the solution was so simple. All they needed was vitamin C. And they didn't realize that, that it was a vitamin deficiency that was causing it. And of course, the great tragedy is the expedition before it round Cape Horn and these violent seas, it had stopped on a little island, and there were all these limes and lemons, and they could have brought those on the ship, but they didn't know that was something they needed. And the British Navy, as later in the century when they realized that limes could cure scurvy, would bring them on the ship, which is why British seamen became known as limeys.
Yeah, and as extraordinary as that they get shipwrecked, and that's a pretty bad deal. Is the celery, which is the one thing on Wager Island that's edible, more or less, apart from seaweed and various
Yes,
bits of fish.
right, and they don't even understand why. They're like, okay, we nibbled, we were starving, we nibbled on some seaweed. I mean, we nibbled on some celery, which did cure their scurvy.
Yeah, I mean, so that's take him with one hand and give him with the other.
Celery, so I don't know, it's not much.